Well, I know what it feels like to think the whole world is against you, Alex said. We'd better get going. I don't want to be late. Trix flew into the air and fluttered down the path. The twins walked after her. Alex, are you crazy? Connor said. We've got a tier. Let's get out of here. We're the only people in the world who this fairy has, Alex said. We're going to be good people and help her out. Connor grunted with frustration. Helping this fairy isn't going to take away bad memories you have from school, Alex. Alex ignored him and followed Trix down the path. Connor followed, sulking the entire way. They traveled deeper into the fairy kingdom. Everything in the distance seemed to sparkle. They thought it was a mirage at first, but the closer they got, they saw that the trees, the grass, and the path all shined and shimmered in the sunlight. What's up with all that glitter? Connor asked. I don't think it's glitter. I think it's magic, Alex said. They reached the heart of the kingdom and were completely bewildered by what they saw. It was like they were standing in a gigantic tropical garden with large, colorful flowers of all shapes and species. There were weeping willows over small ponds and vines that grew across the ground and up the trees. There were beautiful bridges over many streams and ponds. There were fairies everywhere. Many flew around in the air. Some just hovered above the ground, and some walked on smaller paths adjacent to the ones the twins were on. They were all different shapes and sizes and colors. Some were taller than Alex and Connor, some were as small as Trix, and some didn't seem even to be solid, but rather made from pure light. There were just as many male fairies as there were female. Some of the fairies wore gowns, others' clothes were made entirely from plant materials, and some wore nothing at all. Many had many miniature homes in the branches of the trees or in mushrooms on the ground, and there were fairies who even lived underwater with a colorful fish. Something about this place made Alex feel as if everything were right in this world. It gave her hope, excitement, and happiness with every step she took. It was paradise. Have you ever seen something so beautiful in your entire life, Alex? Asked her brother. Not too shabby, Connor said. The Fairy Council operates in the Fairy Palace. It's just up ahead, Trix said, and gestured the twins to follow her over the pond. They, of course, took a bridge. They walked toward a palace made entirely out of golden arches and pillars. It was completely open. There were no more than 2 walls to line each room, and all the windows were tall with no glass. When you lived in a palace as beautiful as this, who would want to keep out the environment? Trix took the twins to the center of the palace, into a long room with many seats facing the front. This would be the perfect place for a wedding, Alex said. At the front of the room were 7 fairies, Alex and Connor's size. They looked like a living rainbow. Each was dressed in a specific color, and they stood behind podiums positioned over an arch. That's the Fairy Council, Trix said. That's Rosette, the red fairy, Tangerina, the orange fairy, Xanthos, the yellow fairy, Emeralda, the green fairy. She's mostly in charge. Skyline, the blue fairy, Violetta, the purple fairy, and Coral, the pink fairy. Rosette was short and plump and had very rosy cheeks. Tangerina was stylish and wore her orange hair in a large beehive with actual bees flying around it. Xanthos was male. He wore a shiny suit and parts of him were ablaze. Emeralda was tall and beautiful. She was black and wore a long emerald dress that matched her eyes and jewelry. Skyline was very pale and had hair the color of the sky and flowing robes the color of the sea. Violetta was the oldest and had grayish purple hair. Coral was the youngest, no more than a few years older than the twins in appearance, and wore a simple pink dress and had a pair of pink wings on her back. There were 2 empty seats on either side of the podiums. Who sits there? Alex asked Trix. The fairy godmother sits on the left, and Mother Goose sits on the right. Trix said. They complete the fairy council, although they're rarely here. They're always traveling around the kingdoms helping people. Is that you, Trix? Esmeralda asked. Yes, I'm here. Trix peeped nervously and flew to the front of the podiums. You're late. Please come forward, Esmeralda said. She was gracious but authoritative, someone the twins would definitely want in their corner during an altercation. Trix, do you know why you've been called before the Fairy Council? Trix shamefully nodded her head. Yes, ma'am. Being a fairy requires a strong sense of responsibility, Tangerina said. Responsibility that you haven't shown. Trix nodded some more. Her eyes were swelling with tears. I know, she squeaked. Unfortunately, we can't let your actions go unpunished, Violetta said. We need to make an example of you to reinforce the #1 rule of being a fairy, Rosette said. To never, under any circumstance, use your magic harmfully against another person, place, or thing, Xanthos said. Unfortunately, there's only one thing for us to do, Skylene said. We have to banish you from the fairy kingdom, Coral said. Trix covered her eyes and wept harder than she had all day. I understand, she said through her sobs. Whoa, 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 Connor yelled from the back. Hold on, are you kidding me? He promptly walked to the front of the room and stood next to the spot where Trix was hovering. Connor, Alex said, and tried to grab him, but it was too late. Are you seriously going to ban her for making one little mistake? Connor asked the council with his hands on his hips. There was whispering and murmuring among them. They were appalled that someone would so openly question their judgment. Please don't try to help me, Trix whispered to Connor. Young man, who do you think you are? Xanthos said. Well, I'm just a kid, but even I can tell you that your ruling is ridiculous, Connor said. They all gasped, except for Esmeralda, who kept her calm and imposing demeanor. Alex slapped an open palm against her forehead. How dare you, Tangerina said, and the bee swirling around her hair grew mad and flew faster around her head. You are out of line, Violetta said. How disrespectful, Coral said. How rude, Skylene said. Esmeralda was the only member of the assembly to remain silent. She studied Connor with her emerald eyes. Silence, Esmeralda ordered. She raised a hand, and all her fellow assembly fairies went quiet. Let the boy speak. I want to hear what he has to say. Go ahead, young man. Connor wasn't sure if this was a trick or not, but he didn't hold back.